Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed the city tour in the last episode of this Cape Lomond Cities Skylines 2 series. Now, we can crack on with the downtown area, and the very first thing I want to do is to add an additional method of transport with the creation of a passenger harbour. This will mean that we have every method of transport catered for within walking distance, except for air travel of course. We're not going to have an airport right in the middle of our downtown. We've got some custom harbour infrastructure. We've got an absolute banger of an interchange that's going to be really compact in our downtown. We've got a conference centre, some city services and some industry, and it's all going to be brought together with some really intricate detailing. So let's crack on. So step one here is to get the layout for the grid sorted out. The city was supposed to be taking influence from the Gulf states of America, but it's kind of strayed off that path somewhat as I come across different things that I want to build in. I'm okay with that, but I do want to take inspiration from those states in the first instance when it's possible. So in terms of the grid system, I've landed on the grid pattern from Jacksonville, Florida. It's 370 by 300 feet, I believe, which is the same grid size as Chicago. So in real money, that translates to 112 meters by 96 meters. I'm going to get some real inspiration from another Gulf Coast city later in the video, but we'll get to that just shortly. Now in hindsight, what I should have done before I started on the transport hub, all those weeks ago, was actually to build the grid first. So I'll know for next time. None of these roads are going to match up perfectly with the grid, which is slightly upsetting, but I'll soldier through, and in fairness, it won't be a million miles off the grid we're creating actually. Now, I do want to change up the direction of the grid, and I'm going to use a large diagonal road to mark that spot. I'm not putting anything fancy in for now, that'll act more of as a marker for later development. There's going to be some scope for road builder to come into play later, but today is not the day. Some of these routes on the grids will be expanded, so I'll make them wider is what I mean, and I'll have a series of collector roads running through the downtown as well. I'll need to have a sit down and figure out what the best plan of action for that will be. So let's have a quick look at what we got. I think once it's all marked out, it does actually make things easier to imagine, what's going to be put in place later on. I can kind of sort of imagine different districts, with their own purpose and their own look. So with the grid in place, it's time to decide on the location of the passenger harbour. There were a few candidates around this section of the map, and I was thinking about the possibility of even having it on the other side of the water on the adjacent island. But in the end, I decided I just wanted it as close as possible to the existing transport hub. I really do want to encourage the Sims to walk as much as possible, and having this as close as a proximity to the transport hub absolutely makes sense. Once we have it up and running, I reckon a dedicated tram line coming out of here and taking them to the transport hub would make sense as well. Should be a nice little addition to the transport strategy of the city. I kind of shoehorned it into position. It was a bit of a squeeze, but after pushing the shipping line out with a bit of move it, I managed to get that in just about okay. I went for all the upgrades because why not? We get plenty of money, so we'll go for that. Now I wasn't 100% sure on what the plan was going to be directly across the road from the harbour, but I had been looking at the port on New Orleans, and there are quite a few features of the build today that will be somewhat recognisable from that real life city. First up though, I want a major road cutting through this lower part of the grid, and I want a direct route for that part of the city to connect to the highway network. So I'm going to do a quick terraform, and I'm going to connect that right through, and I'll clear out some of the roads that get in the way. I'll give it a bit of a temporary connection for now, and this can all be adjusted once we start building out here of course, but one thing that probably will stay in place throughout the final transition from 6-lane separated to 6-lane highway, so I'm going to spend a minute and we'll get that connection looking good by move it. I'd like to extend the major roads that run down to this area, and first I'm going to extend that big arterial that runs the length of the map. We now finally have a starting point for it, which kind of feels weird because it's been such a long time coming. But then I'm going to run a preliminary road north along the coast, and we'll give it a rough connection to the highway service interchange to the north as well. This road isn't set in stone, we can adjust it for what we're going to build along here in later episodes. You maybe noticed the colour in the video has changed back to what it usually looks like here in Cape Lomond. There was something up with unidentified setting, don't know what it was, but we're back to normal now. I thought long and hard about whether to get a compact interchange coming off that bridge, and I had been eyeballing this interchange in the same area of New Orleans. It seemed doable, but it looked like it might be too steep a decline, so a little bit of experimentation really here, I guess, just to see if it would be workable. But after playing about with it, I stuck with a maximum decline of 7%, and I think that's about the limit of what I feel comfortable that looks reasonable, you know, in this game. Now the idea with this interchange here is to loop around underneath the highway and then hook back into that coastal collector road that we've just made. It was clear that the ground level road was going to be too close to the ramps to get them down at a reasonable angle, so I went ahead and I pushed it back further towards the water, so we'll make a little quay wall out of that. After sorting out the terrain, it was clear that I could complete the first ramp without any major issues, and managed to keep it nice and compact and up against the existing roads. The ramp or the road on the other side of the highway, however, was going to be too steep, so it was time for another approach, and I decided to create an extra loop element that will help bring down the elevation nice and gently. And you can see something similar in the Nampu Bridge in China. The design is quite different, of course, but the basic principle in terms of how the traffic is brought down in elevation is basically the same. I'll need to run the ramp out a bit further away from the main overpass, as I want to hit the collector road flush and get that connection roughly at a 90-degree angle. So that's 2 out of the 4 directions of traffic sorted out for this interchange. I think that's looking pretty cool already, isn't it? Now I'm going to address traffic looking to travel east. So first thing I want to do is to get a feel for how long the ramp will need to be to enable us to have a reasonable incline in elevation. So we can do that by pulling out the road, we'll stretch it along the highway, and let's just keep going until we get 7% or less that we're looking for. Once I was happy with this spot, I upgraded the highway to a 4-lane, and that's where our connection point to the ramp is going to be. If it's still a bit sharp of an angle, I'm just going to delete it, and I'm going to move that 4-lane section back a bit. So from here on, it's just a case of connecting the ramps to the on-off junctions on the ground level road, and a couple of minor lane adjustments, and we're pretty much set. So let's get that wrapped up quickly. Cool, and that's the interchange done. It'll be interesting to see how that copes with the additional traffic once it comes, but I reckon that is going to do us just fine for the foreseeable future. Not gonna lie, I'm really looking forward to seeing them use those circular ramps. For whatever reason, this asset gives you some land that you just simply can't terraform. Really annoying. I truly do not like this at all, so I'm going to show you guys how you can go about hiding it. So I'm going to use the same asset that we've used in the subway and the train station build earlier in the series. We're going to create some retaining quay walls. I did mention at the time that these Patio 2 assets will work fine in water, so now is the perfect time to use them. Just a case of drawing out a line of them, and then once we've got them in place, we're going to use move it, and we are going to get the heights all lined up nicely. Any fine addition, of course, Cuboid's move it will be the one to go for, and we can fine adjust this and get it in just the place that we want. Now, anytime I've used this asset in the past, there's never been a problem deleting the sub-elements on there, so the deck chairs and the lights, if you want to get rid of the lights. And usually I would recommend deleting the sub-assets once you're happy with all the terraforming. They do have a habit of respawning these sub-elements. However, didn't quite work out this time. I couldn't for the life of me figure out why. Bulldozer just wouldn't let me delete half of them, but we'll address that challenge later on. To fill the gap in the ground that cannot be terraformed, I went and created another row or two of the same asset, and after messing about with the terraforming and move it, we should be left with what appears to be a flat or flattish little section on each side of the harbour. So let's have a quick look at that. Yep, it's looking okay. To help accentuate the built environment up a bit, I went and extended that quay wall along and under the bridge, and I think it makes sense to have that retaining wall terminate onto another concrete looking structure. I think it definitely looks better than running it into natural ground. By the way, if anyone knows why the harbour asset keeps popping the ground level at the harbour wall up, please let me know. I can work around it by selecting the harbour asset and quickly just raising it and then lowering it again quickly, but it's really not ideal. So give me a shout in the comments if you know how to fix that. I changed my mind on having parking across the road from the terminal. I think it'd be a bit too much as I'm planning on having parking on either side of the actual terminal itself. So I went and deleted them and just cracked on with getting a basic parking layout sorted. So having a look at the same area in New Orleans, you can see that there's a massive conference centre. You have a consumer entrance, so to speak, on one side, and then you've got truck delivery access and whatnot on the other side. For this build, I'm actually going to flip that around, so I'm going to have the consumer access front door at the front of this development facing the actual harbour itself, and for the truck access and whatnot round the back, I'm going to have that towards the quay wall to the higher elevated section. I think it's a better fit for what we're building here. I used repeated assets, office at the front, industrial at the back, and now I want it to look like one big building, and I definitely don't want any individual signage at the front, so I got rid of that. I'm going to add something a bit more uniform later on, but that'll be a game of whack-a-mole, as they obviously do like to come back, you know how it is. I know you can disable them entirely for the map, but I don't want to do that. For me, it was important to match up the colours, so I used Recolor to do what I could, best I could. And at the front, I do want to remove the detail and really give a proper uniform look. So using this block surface from Piccana, I'm going to just replace what's there, and I think it worked pretty well. Now obviously using the office assets like this, it is going to cause some traffic to magically drive through walls. I can't imagine it's going to be a huge amount, but that's a small price I'll pay to get the look I'm going for here. Off camera, I'll rejig the surfaces, build a bit of a car park at the back of the conference centre, and I wasn't too happy with the angles of the east retaining wall, so I'm going to do a quick redo on that, and I reckon it should look a little bit better, and yeah, we'll get rid of some of the funky terraforming that otherwise would be sticking out of that harbour corner as well. I mentioned earlier on that we're going to have some issues with this asset, and as you'll see here, it's just not going to let me delete all these sub-elements on the patio assets, which was really unfortunate and something I haven't had an issue with in the past. I did have a go at that for quite a while. Obviously I couldn't leave them there and they kind of looked ridiculous, you know, but the solution I came out with for the moment anyway was to use the shed asset and create a bit of a storage facility or something. I don't know, I really didn't like it, but to save more insanity at this point of the build, and for the sake of being pragmatic, I just cracked on with it, and you'll see in the cinematics at the end, they are there, but I did revisit it after finishing up the video, and I managed to delete them and draw them back in, and with that it was going to be able to let me delete those sub-elements. They still like growing back in randomly, but nothing I can do about that. Like most of the port areas, you might expect something of an industrial area or some city services in the vicinity, and that's exactly what I'm going to do down here. I'll kick things off with a couple of electricity substations, and once they're in place I'll adjust that rail section to accommodate the roads underneath. And a little bit of terraforming, a little bit of redrawing was in order, and I'm going to route those big pylons underground as well, so they're not taking up too much real estate, but I definitely want them in along that elevated highway. I think they look pretty nice. I 100% wanted some warehousing down here, so I made space for one of the big warehouse assets, and I'm going to fill that block in with some appropriate smaller assets to complete that double block section. One of the very smallest of the building assets is actually going to fit underneath that railway, and that'll fill that gap really, really nice. As I grow out this industrial area, I'm just going to use normal zoning and see what spawns in. If I'm not happy with what I've got, then I'm going to delete it, and we'll see what the alternative is. I definitely do not want any chimneys down here. Any of them pop up, they're going to get deleted as they go along. As I build out that area, I'm going to use various decals to give the area a little bit of colour and a little bit of character. In these tightly packed areas like this, using these different decals are a nice and easy, quick way of getting rid of the grass surfaces, and it'll give a less uniform look than using surfaces, for example. I will be using some of these decals to provide some unique parking spaces. Although the decals will hide the parking lines, you can reduce the height, the elevation of the decals themselves, and you can bring them down ever so gently using the transform mod. So this will reveal parking spaces with little gentle lines, and it'll give a nice weathered look on the area, which is pretty sweet. I'll continue to build layers here and there, and I'll add a bit of vegetation, just a little in those sort of unused pockets of land, which should look the part. So gonna crack on with the rest of the detail, and there is quite a bit to do, including the car park areas at the side of the harbour of course as well. I did make a couple of last minute adjustments that didn't make it into the final cinematics, but there's a nice tip in there regarding interchanges and terrain, so don't miss that. Right, I'll crack on with that, and I'll catch up with you in a couple of minutes. Now you might have seen me fill in some janky land around the interchange, vertical pillars. That was necessary as I terraformed around it and I raised the ground level after constructing the road around it. Figured out you can actually delete those poles just as you would normally with Better Bulldozer from Yin Yang, terraform the road below the way you want it, then reconstruct them pillars by double clicking the road above it. That'll create a node, kind of like the roundabout trick we covered earlier in the series, but that node will automatically reconstruct the pillars, but this time they will be adjusted for the terrain changes that you've just made. And bingo, no more weird ground around pillar bases, and it's funny the things you think about when you're lying in your bed, huh? So for that issue I was having with the sub-elements on the extended harbour retaining wall, the solution was simple. I just had to delete them, redraw them. For whatever reason, it let me delete the subsections, so we could get rid of those daft storage sheds, which was quite a relief. I really did not like them in there. So we got a nice lit up open walkway along the water here now, and on both sides of the harbour. I added a few trees, a few bushes rather, you know, to break things up, and I think it came out pretty nice. As I said earlier, these late additions didn't quite make the cinematic review shots, but they will be in the city regardless going forward, and that's really all that counts. Oh, and I forgot. Don't forget to create a passenger line once you put the harbour in either. Okay, I did realise that actually once I finished the build. I hadn't actually hooked up the blooming lines, so don't forget that if you're building your own. I'm really happy with that little pocket of development. I reckon having the conference centre right next to the harbour is a great location for it. I reckon in retrospect I might revisit the conference centre facade. I think I can add a bit more interest in it, and I think I'd maybe like to detail up the front of it a bit more and perhaps break up the building style as well. I don't know, I don't often come back, but yeah, not 100% on that one. It is giving some cool views towards the bridge interchange already, and that's an exciting addition. It's quite a striking part of the city already, I think. I reckon I did a reasonable job in squeezing another interchange in that space. Kind of surprised myself with that one, to be completely honest. I think it's a lovely addition to the city skyline. And there, I said it, city skylines. We're now at the point where we can start to think how that skyline is going to look downtown as we creep towards that area. There's some nice detailing opportunities under that bridge as well, so we can have a look at that once we start building on the other side of the road. And it's made significantly easier now that we've managed to get some good flat land under it. Little industry over here between the port and the highway I reckon was a good shout. All those little decals are giving that bit of character, and that's always welcome. I'm going to extend that theme north on the other side of the interchange, the other side of the highway. We can definitely get some more city services along that strip, in particular water and garbage especially. Those garbage trucks at the moment have quite some way to travel, and I reckon they're going to struggle to get round the downtown, so having the facility a little bit closer I think is definitely going to be the right way. Remember guys, the Cape Lomond build competition is live now. Get involved in the Discord before it's too late. You get 4 weeks from this video going out. I'm going to leave you with a shot or two of the build now. But that's it. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.